Yeah, it's rolling.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are
Daagspreken, because the camera staat zo. En de microfoon nog.
Hi. Welcome, my colleagues from Rotterdam.
Great.
We have three. So they now get into three line. So welcome everyone to this lunch lecture, the UK&A Urban Knowledge Network Asia lunch lecture. My name is Paul Bay. I'm the coordinator of the Urban Knowledge Network Asia here at IAS. We're being live streamed, so but despite that, don't be afraid to engage in a good discussion afterwards. Welcome to our friends from STIPO and City at eye level, Hans, Sienna, and two of your colleagues, Naomi and Nienke. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves in a minute, but I will just, what I'll say is that we're going to have an interesting talk today about cities at neighborhood level, or at eye level, and we met each other about a month or two ago, and we realized we have a lot in common. We is Urban Knowledge Network Asia, and one of our projects, the Southeast Asia Neighborhood Project, or network, I should say, which is run from here at IAS in Leiden. We have a network of partners throughout Southeast Asia, looking at neighborhoods in Southeast Asian cities. And our overriding research question is how can we help to, let's say, make sure that neighborhoods in Asian cities remain at the human level, remain livable places. And we have a big pedagogical element to the CNET project where we're looking at the knowledge about neighborhoods, about cities, beyond the Western knowledge, only beyond official discourses about the city. Your perspective, your work is slightly more practitioner-oriented. You're going to tell us about it, what you do in the Netherlands, what you do in other Western countries, and now increasingly also in Asia, and how you work and with what kind of partners and what your guiding philosophy is. So I think we have that in common in our approaches to making neighborhoods livable. So I'm looking forward to this discussion. Hans and Sienna, about 40-45 minutes. I'd like to ask the audience to keep your questions to afterwards, and then I hope we can have a nice discussion. For those of you who don't have your lunches yet, there are lunches in the other room, the kitchen next door, and then feel free to eat while we talk, and then the discussion. So welcome.
Thank you very much. Sienna, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself first? Stand a little bit closer to the microphone. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Siënna Veelders. I work for STIPO, and I have a background in cultural heritage. And we are launching the City at Eye Level book and network, and that is also what we're going to talk about today.
And we hope that to be a big invitation, basically, to anybody who would like to join, who help us with thoughts and networks, and etc. We'll talk a little bit about that more later on. My name is Hans Karssenberg. I'm an urban planner by background. I'm one of the founding partners of STIPO. STIPO is based in the Netherlands, works nationally but also internationally. We're an interdisciplinary team for urban development. Interdisciplinary for us means that we embrace both the physical planning side, the development side, but also the more human social side. So, for instance, we have a psychologist, an anthropologist, a sociologist in our team, and also more the economic side of things. So we also have people on board with a background more in heritage, background in economy, all the different angles that you need to make a good city for human beings to be in our view. So thank you, Paul, for the invitation, and thank you for all being here. And hope you enjoy your meals in the meantime. One big law in placemaking, we do a lot in placemaking, is if you want to see the place with activity, you should put out food. So food is very important for an informal atmosphere, for people to feel at home. So this is actually the best atmosphere we could imagine. And unfortunately, I will have to wait a little bit.
You have to start.
And a big welcome to the audience online as well. Happy to have you all on board. So, a little bit about STIPO. We're an interdisciplinary team based in Rotterdam, Amsterdam, Thessaloniki, and in Stockholm. We started out at the University of Amsterdam about 25 years ago to combine working in practice as practitioners and really changing and helping to create better urban neighborhoods in practice with developing knowledge and doing research and giving trainings and education. So I think I would see ourselves as practitioners mostly, but always in connection with bringing theoretical knowledge from scientific studies to practice and bridging that gap that's always there, and also making it hopefully tangible enough for people to use and then give trainings in that. So this is what we still do today. I think you could see us more or less as a social enterprise in the sense that the money we make with our commercial projects, we kind of plow back into developing and sharing knowledge in programs like the City at Island, like this book that we have here, which is also available online, open source for anybody to download, because for us it's about sharing the knowledge, hopefully encouraging people to actually use this knowledge in practice as much as they can, rather than keeping that knowledge within a small circle. We are very much a value-driven organization, we're not a neutral organization, because we started out to provide a different perspective on what is true sustainability within the cities. And by that we mean that we want to help create areas that the users will be happy with in the beginning, of course, but also hopefully 50, 100, 200 years from now. So how do we create urban environments? How do we transform existing urban environments in a way that the users will still be happy in that area, knowing that 50 years from now we will have a totally different demography living in an area, we have totally different economic realities. So how do we create our urban systems in a way that they can adapt through time and they keep some great qualities like these values here. So long-lasting quality, the soul of the place. And we found through our studies that in those neighborhoods and cities that have proven to keep functioning over the decades and centuries, the quality of the public space is really key. It's a key element of that. So that's one of the reasons why we are so much involved into what's called the city at eye level, the city you see around you when you walk down the streets as a human being, as a pedestrian. So, just some to introduce a little bit how we like to look at cities. Theoretically speaking, this is in Utrecht, in the fourth city in the Netherlands. It's at the back of the train station. It's where the expo area is, and it's quite an area built up of concrete and glass and grey elements. So it's quite a sterile, clean area. The city is trying to change that, by the way. But these stairs, these concrete stairs, in theory, would be quite terrible for human beings. But all you need to do is to skip one step and to create a seating place, and to know that this is actually facing the south. And in the Netherlands, in the Dutch climate, we really like the sun because we don't always get it. And no matter what time of year, there's always, and when the sun is out, when the sun is shining, people will always be sitting here. So what does it take to turn a space into a place for human beings? That's one of the elements that we research in our programs. And then we want to look at streets like these. This is a picture taken in Thessaloniki in Greece. And I don't know what your perception is, but I think it's safe to say that in the street, walking down the street, you feel at home as a human being. Right? Would you agree with me on that?
Yes.
So that's a kind of a gut feeling that you have when you walk down a street like this. And what we are trying to discover is what are the mechanisms behind it? What are the mechanisms behind that experience? How do we as human beings experience the space around us? And what are the criteria of a street like this for it to be human, for it to be welcoming, and for you to feel at home in the street? Because if we can find out the underlying criteria, and if we can put them into words, then we are able to repeat them in new developments. And I think that's one of the key topics of what we try to do with the City at Eye Level program. Or for spaces like these. So, and of course, a lot when it comes to experiencing public space, this is in Kuala Lumpur, is very contextual and it's very much depending on the climate, for instance. Because when it's hot, you like to have a roof over your head to be protected from the sun. Or culturally different. So we try to take and embrace, and we would like to actually discuss that with you guys as well. What are the specific elements that we should be aware of when it comes to developing a City at Eye Level Asia program? So it's trees like these that we used to have more or less naturally in our cities, in the historic, more historic parts of the city, that have a great diversity, great dynamic, great flexibility as well. And for some reason, it seems as though until the war, let's say, this kind of happened naturally. I don't know even if we had it in the core of our planning philosophy back then to create human-scale cities, but it's just more or less what happened. One of the reasons is that cities function based on the amount of time that people have to spend getting from one place to the other. And of course, before the war, before we had the car, we used to walk mostly, and everything had to happen more or less within the radius of the walking distance. So we had to work, shop, recreate, live all in the same area, and that led to very mixed use urban environments. Then, of course, this happened after the war. The mass introduction of the car enabled us, in our planning models, to start to separate different functions. The areas where you live, the areas where you work, all of a sudden we're not entangled within the same area anymore, and we're separated. And that has created a lot of new environments that don't have this human skill, such as this environment, I would say, very car-dominated. And of course, we cannot avoid to talk about that. This happened. I don't know if you recognize this hand. So we had this whole movement of this philosophy of modernism, both in architecture, in design, and in urban development, urban design, urban planning. And we're trying to be not black and white about this, because we realized that the modernists were active in a time in our cities when we had industries in our residential neighborhoods polluting the streets, right? So I think it was very natural for them to want to separate those functions and to create clean air in the places we live in. So I think we owe a lot to the modernists. But unfortunately, this became the dominant urban development model, and the modernists, I think, they missed out on one crucial element. They perceived human beings as rational beings only. And of course, we'd like to get from A to B in a very efficient way, but we really have two parts of our brains, right? So we also want to experience the environment. We also want to be inspired by it and challenged by the environment. We also have feelings when it comes to the environment we have. So for some reason, the modernists didn't really catch that. And I think all that we're doing now, and we're not the only ones doing that, is trying to take the good things of modernism and then add new layers to that. Trying to get back to the human values that we used to have more naturally before. This guy is the plant was right on the background. the plan that Le Corbusier had made for the inner city of Paris. He wanted to tear the entire inner city of Paris, historic inner city, down, because he found it a nuisance, basically, with too much chaos, too little rationality, which of course we realize today, fortunately, did not happen, but unfortunately, this Plan Bazin was built on the outskirts of Paris, and in lots of fast developing cities since. One of the things that happened internationally is that the World Urban Agenda 20, 40 years ago was very much based on this modernist idea of the car-based city, separating functions, and I think that it did a lot of damage to a lot of the fast-growing cities, also in Asia. But that's for the debate already. So what you see now is that because of this happening in the past and because of the experience we have with these failing areas, a lot of the cities across the world are trying to seek ways to change this. So there's really a momentum, I would say, for thinking about rethinking human scale in our cities. And this is not only happening in North America and in Europe, we would say, but it's also happening in Asia, in Latin America, etc., etc. So that's what this program of ours is also about, to catch that atmosphere and to catch the knowledge of everybody's innovating at the moment. The City at Eye Level itself, the book was written with 80 contributors from all across the world to get all those different angles, with partners such as Project for Public Spaces in New York. The UN Habitat is a very important partner for us. We have partners in Brazil, for instance, who had the book translated into Portuguese, because they found that, right now the urban development of the cities in Brazil is at a moment where they really need to rethink the quality of public space. So we launched a book in Brazil with 800 people from across all cities in Brazil. And since then, we started making new versions, because all the time you find out that you need to learn more. So one time, somebody from the UN Habitat came up to us and said, "But you haven't written anything about the kids. And how could you have missed that?" And we actually do a lot of projects, child-friendly city development, because we think it's important to think through how we can make our cities a better environment for children. That led to an entirely new book that is to be launched in about a month from now, again with 80 contributions from all across the world. So people in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, North America are working to make our cities better for children. And we'd like to get those networks together. Yeah, and now the next step for us would be to have a special book only about Asia, only with Asian cases, and that's why we need your help as well. We have a list of about 80 cases, but we don't know probably a lot of them still, because you have access to a lot of more cases. So you could help build this movement, build this momentum, really. Siënna will talk more about this more at the end of this talk. The book was also used by UN Habitat towards the new World Urban Agenda, adopted in Quito, was it last year, right? 2 years ago already, yeah, you're right. And if you look carefully at the text in that new World Urban Agenda, it's really a paradigm shift. It's not this modernist model of 20 or 40 years ago anymore. It's really about a holistic approach, about the fine-grained development of cities, human scale, more participatory approach to urban development. So I think there's a paradigm shift going on the highest level. The World Urban Agenda was adopted, so it's official now. If you're a member of the UN, this is what you have to do. But then how do we implement it? I thought it'd be interesting to speak a little bit about the relationship between formal and informal. And we always do that, but especially in the Asian context, I think this is we've noticed that this is an ongoing debate. Because if you come from a background where you had a very informal city and you now are developing a very modern new city, you might have the tendency to want to get rid of all that informality and chaos on the street and immediately jump to the more rational, modern city, and we see that as the new utopia, right? So, interestingly, by the way, the UN Habitat asked for a new Charter of Athens. Le Corbusier wrote that Charter of Athens with the modernists in the 30s. That became then the dominant model of modernism. And now with the new paradigm shift, they asked Richard Sennett, Ricky Burdett, Saskia Sassen, people like those, Jean-Claude, to come up with a new Charter of Athens. And what they write in that is, for instance, it's about porosity, it's about the quality of public spaces. But I like to stress out this word. One of the things they're saying is it's a quality for a city to be incomplete. I always ask the architects in the room, did you ever get an assignment to make a building that was incomplete? For the urban planners in the room, did you ever get the assignment to make an area that was incomplete? But what does Sennett mean by this? It means that if a city is too complete, it's too sterile, then it doesn't invite the users of the city to start co-investing. Whereas if you provide a framework within which the users can adapt the city, have some mental ownership, can co-invest, then the city will start to function better. So there's these interesting new notions coming up on the highest level, I would say. So when we talk about informality and we look at the Asian context, we can say that there's a lot of, we came to Kuala Lumpur and Siënna had already been there. The first thing she took me was this night market where everybody's sitting together, eating food, feeling at home, talking from one table to the other. I mean, we talked with everybody around us, right, while we were eating. So I think if you look at this, then you can say that these people are natural born placemakers. Right? This is what the quality, this is human skill, this is what the sense of place, feeling at home is about, I would say. And maybe if the informality becomes too much, it's not a good thing either. So we could discuss, is this maybe too informal, and how would you balance that? But then still, the informality of having a small-scale shop on the ground floor. And while I was taking this picture, these guys started looking at me, and we engaged into a talk with each other. That's what humans like to do, right? To have a conversation with each other. So if this would have been a blind wall, and there wouldn't have been a shop, and there wouldn't have been people there, we would have never engaged into that talk. So we observe a lot, we look a lot at what people actually do in public space. I love this picture. I don't even know why I put it in there, but I like a world like that. So even in a more modern form, and then we try to look always for these signs of what we call mental ownership. It's probably not a legal ownership, but people caring after the space, people looking after the space in some way. And it's the small telltales that you can observe when you walk down the street. Like this was a hole in the asphalt, and somebody was kind enough to put a plant here. Now, when we discussed this in Kuala Lumpur, some people in the audience said, well, we don't see this as a positive sign, we see this as a selfish sign. So it would be interesting to have this debate with each other. But what you get a lot, of course, is this new type of urban development. So it's corporate-driven money. And Saskia Sassen is analyzing there's a lot of corporate-driven money going into the cities that they tend to lead to these tick-the-box kind of safe projects for the people putting in the investment, and then these tend to lead to this kind of sterile urban environments like these, or like these, or like these. And they call these buildings iconic. And of course, high-rise is a topic I will want to speak about that briefly. We're not against high-rise, but we are against high-rise that sits on the ground like this or like this. This is as if we were trying to have a conversation with each other and I'm turning my back at you. This is a very impolite thing to do in our point of view. So how can you combine high-rise, because we're going to need high-rise, we're going to need the density in our cities. How can we combine high-rise with the great city at eye level human scale in our streets? That's one of the key questions we should ask. So what we try to do is to use research on how do we perceive public space. And I talk hours about this. which I won't do right now, but I just want to give one example. How does our eye work? How do we look at our environment? Well, we have to realize then that our eye stems from this frog. I don't know if this particular frog, but of course it comes through evolution from the amphibians and the reptiles. And there's a thing to know about their vision. They don't see still standing objects. So if a frog would be sitting on this table, it wouldn't be able to see this book because it's standing still. Their eyes are only drawn to movement. So if a fly passes by, then of course you want to catch it to survive. Now we have the same eyes, but we still get to see this book because we have through evolution, we developed these tiny muscles in our eyeballs, making our eyeballs tremble, so that we can still register still standing objects. But at the same time, our eyes are much more drawn to movement than to still standing objects. Now, what does that mean for our profession, urban development? Well, if you make a street like this, that means there is a lot of movement, a lot of different things happening. Every 5 millimeters, there's a new facade, there's a new color, there's a new reason to go in and outside, there's a new smell even, to have all the senses in place. And we know in streets like these, people feel at home. This is a universal research-based observation. Whereas if you make your streets like these, with boring, long facades, horizontal lines disappearing into the horizon, then people will walk faster, people will be bored more, they will feel unsafe more, and they won't feel at home. And this, by the way, is the head office of OMA, our most important architect in the Netherlands. We very often find that the worst environments are created by publicly owned buildings or architecture institutions for some reason. So, and then we do the research underneath that. We try to discover what are the criteria, the qualities of vibrant streets versus the qualities of, let's say, boring streets. So this is research done in the Netherlands, conducted in the Netherlands mostly. These are two of the most beautiful streets in Amsterdam, most lively streets in Amsterdam, like the Haarlemmerstraat in Amsterdam. And very similar to this street in KL, it has a door, a unit every 4 meters on average, every 4 to 5 meters. So there's a lot of in and out, a lot of interaction between the inside of those buildings and the outside of those buildings. And blue then are the public functions, and green are the residential functions. So it's mostly the public functions, of course, that you can go in and out of. If you look at very boring streets in Amsterdam and in Rotterdam, you might look at the Weesperstraat or the Crossing or Vela. You tend to get these types of streets with long office blocks and just one revolving door every 200 meters. Now we know from research that if a pedestrian flow doesn't encounter something new every, let's say, 100 meters, they will get bored and they will just disappear from the street. It's like ant flows through the city. So if you create your streets like those, you are not likely to have people feel at home. Then we have Jan Geel doing research, and we feel very much related to Jan Geel, and they're a partner in the book as well. And they've actually done research. How many times do people turn their heads? How fast do they walk? How many stops do they make in the street? And in very vibrant streets, people turn their heads 75% of the time, whereas in very boring streets, they only turn their heads 21% of the time. So in terms of the eye and being drawn to movement, if you provide a lot of what Jan Geel calls 5 km/h architecture, a lot of variety in the street, people will slow down the pace, feel at home more, and spend more time in the street as well, which, if it's a shopping street, is also better for the economy of the street. So these are all interlinked. There's much more to tell about this, about the way we hear our environment, the way we want to be close or not close to other people, the way we want to have buildings on our backs to feel safe in a public space, the way we look at the expressions of other people's faces, so, but maybe for the discussion. Then we'd like to challenge the idea of what is public space actually. Public space, because if you talk with city governments about public space, they very often only mean the horizontal surface, right? The streets and the let's take a Dutch example. This is the historic map of the historic in the city of Haarlem. Getting out of the train station, you'd expect something a very historic environment, like here in Leiden maybe. And yes, the train station itself is beautiful, but then if you turn 180 degrees, this is what you see. So we're always intrigued with this, because what were the designers thinking? What was the city council thinking here? How does this happen? Of course, it's cheaper to build a parking garage on the ground level rather than to have to dig and make expenses to build an underground parking space. So to create a public facade with public functions on the ground level. This building kills the public space for the next 80 years maybe. Okay, they're tearing it down now after 40 years, but that's not the way the city should be sustainable, right? 40 years is not a life cycle for a building if it's sustainable. So the question is this public space, and then that might lead to these environments, or this, or even these parks that are completely disconnected from anything around them. Or is this public space? Because we define public space as everything you see when you walk on the street. So it includes the facades of buildings, it includes the entire environment that you see around you. Now, this is a totally different definition of public space, and it also means that if this is what we see as public space, it's not only the responsibility of the government, but it's also the responsibility of the private building owners. And you should include them into your process. It's also the responsibility of architects and designers of the urban planning system. So it widens the range of what you should intervene in when you want to create a good public space. And then of that public space, the ground floor of buildings is the most important. That's the part you walk by and see the most when you are a pedestrian on the street. So we say a building may be very beautiful, but if the ground floor is a blank facade, the public space will still not function. Whereas if a building can be ugly as hell, but if the ground floor is very active and open, then the street will still feel at home. So we're not trying to have a discussion about what's beautiful, what's not beautiful. We're trying to understand what are the mechanisms for people to feel at home in public space. So it may look like this, or again, mental ownership. You're trying to spill your garden into public space. We know from research, you don't even need to have people present. If somebody does this, then other people will feel safe enough as well, because they know somebody trusts the public space enough to leave their plants or their little bench here. Or more in the Dutch context, we have our urban psychologists doing research on this. When are the sidewalks more social, when are they not functioning in a social way? If you have this hybrid zone between the private realm and the public realm, where people can put down a sandwich or a bench, they will be in front of the house if you have the living on the ground floor as well. And then this is where he analyzed that 80% of the spontaneous contacts in the neighborhood come from. Because your kids will be doing this, you will be sitting here, and your neighbor passes by, and you have to talk with each other. So if you don't have this hybrid space, you miss out on 80% of the spontaneous contacts in the neighborhood. So the attention to this is happening, luckily, universally, more and more. On all continents, we see projects that we have gathered in these books. But it doesn't come naturally. It doesn't come by itself, because we are all working in urban planning, we're all working in urban design, and we know the mechanisms against us. So designers may have only a bird's eye view on their designs rather than a street view. Or they may place aesthetics over use. Developers may use this standardization of the construction process. I think that's one of the largest opponents that we have working against us now. If you create large blocks, urban blocks, with only one simple facade that was prefabricated somewhere else, and the entire facade is the same everywhere, this is the typical building that you get nowadays, then that doesn't do much good for the human scale. So we need to be aware of those mechanisms against us to be able to address them. to be able to do it differently, to be able to change, try to change our practice. So in the book, we have a list of criteria derived from all the stories, derived from all the people doing research before us on what does it take to create a great city at eye level, on the context level, on the street level, and on the building level. I won't go through all of them now, but just know that it's in the book. If you want to use it, download the book and use it in your own projects. Now there's this notion of public space, and we have the notion of what governments do in public space and placemaking. And what we see very often is that what governments or developers tend to do is to provide only for the first two layers of Maslow's pyramid. You know Maslow's pyramid, right? The human desires. So first we want to feel safe, we want a roof over our heads, we want to have food, and once we have that, we will start to aspire for more. The higher levels of the Maslow pyramid are about being inspired, about the other part of the brain, about experience, interaction with other people, feeling social, being a social person, and that's really what placemaking in the eye level is about. Now there's a deep knowledge behind placemaking. Placemaking nowadays is often perceived as the fun, small, short-term things you do, like bring the flower beds, the petunias, or the deck chairs, or create a city beach, which is all part of placemaking, yes, but placemaking in the end of the day is about creating great places where people feel at home, and for that you need a long-term view as well. You need to combine the 40 years horizon with those short-term actions. So that's what we call tactical urbanism, and all these ideas of placemaking, for instance, has a body of knowledge of 40 years of research. So it's not just a buzzword for us. It's not just a fashionable idea to use, although it's coming up in a lot of cities right now. But for us, it has a much deeper meaning. Another thing we notice in our cases is that if you want to look at success, it's not only about the design. And very often in urban planning, somehow when a place is failing or a neighborhood is failing, we tend to get a new design and then implement it and then think, okay, now we're ready. And then you create a space that nobody uses, or you create a neighborhood that people are not really satisfied with. So for us, it's not only about the design. Design is a part of it, but it's very much first about the use. And the design you could call the hardware, the use we call the software. But then if you look at the great cases in the book, they have another third secret behind them. There's always an element of how do we organize it? How do we manage a space over time? So there's an organization or a coalition or a regulation behind it. So we always look at the quality of public space, the eye level quality, through the eyes of this triangle. We should try to intervene on all these three elements. A little bit about high-rise. Very briefly, but we know this is an important theme in the developing cities, especially in Asia in particular. So we're not against high-rise. Although high-rise very often is mistaken for density. So it's used as density is used as an argument to create high-rise, whereas we know the most compact and dense cities in the world consist of about 8 layers. This urban development model of the inner city of Paris and the inner city of Thessaloniki. The inner city of Thessaloniki is one of the densest inner cities in the world. So you don't per se need high-rise to create a lot of density. So that's the first notion maybe. But then, if you want to create high-rise, how can you do it in a way that it doesn't look like those pictures I showed you before, but it does connect with the street? Now, interestingly enough, the city of Vancouver put a lot of thought into this, which is called the Vancouverism model. Because they have these brownstone houses, and they started thinking, what can we learn from the atmosphere of a street like this? How can we feed it in a newly built part with high-rise? So it has a lot of human skill, right? Because it's only 2-3 stories high, so you can always see it as a human being. So what they started doing is to see if they could repeat this in high-rise environments. So what they do is to have this idea of what they call the podium tower. They create a podium of about 3, 4 stories, maybe 5, 6 stories high. Then there's a setback, and then you have the high-rise element, which creates a lot of human scale on the street, because this street from a distance looks like this. So it's possible to combine high-rise with a great city at eye level, but you have to do certain things for that. So if you look at in the city of Vancouver, this is right now in their building code even, so all the high-rise developers are required to build their podium towers like this. And they create streetscapes rather than only sole towers with fenced gates around them. And we even found an example in Kuala Lumpur, the Petronas Towers. So they created this podium tower, more or less, with an element of 4 stories, and this is a very human-scaled area, although privately owned. But that's another debate. Okay, a little bit about the org. So it's not only about the design and the use, but it's also very much about how do you organize it. So I just wanted to give a few examples from our own practice here, also to share a little bit of what we do. This is the Schouwburgplein in Rotterdam, internationally known for it to be the ugliest square in the world, the worst used square in the world. We couldn't stand aside of that. So with the cultural institutions around the Schouwburgplein and the entrepreneurs of the cafes, we created a coalition to start redefining what is the Schouwburgplein. Now we knew we didn't have any money to change the hardware. So we started from the point of view of software. What can we do to have a different kind of program at the Schouwburgplein? So one of the things that happened now is that we found these guys who had this flying grass carpet, this fantastic artificial grass. They use it all over the world, and we got them to come to the Schouwburgplein. And it meant for the surface, which is made of iron and grey stone, and nobody ever wants to use it, to become softer and to become more intimate, right? So on a warm day, if you count, right now there's about 80 different groups of people using that space, which means that all of a sudden people feel at home in the space. So by programming, by making small changes, you can achieve a lot already. And then you can build on that and learn from that and seek more permanent forms of that. Because right now we're launching into a discussion of how can we change the design more permanently. And I think we've learned something from this tactical urbanism phase. I won't go into all of them. This is an area in Rotterdam called Zoho, or we call it Zoho, it's the Zomerhofkwartier. It was more than 80% vacant when we started. We started reprogramming the empty buildings with the housing association Havenstede, who is owning all the buildings. Again, I could talk for hours about this, but just to give some examples of how small changes can lead to larger investments. This building, for instance, we realized that we couldn't open up the ground floor because there's no door, if you may notice. The door is on the other side. It's the central entrance to the office building, but we wanted a separate function cafe on the ground floor, and then you need a door. So with Havenstede, we made a deal that if we fill up more than 75% of the building, we use that 25% to reinvest into the building to get a door first. So we got ourselves a door, and then we got a cafe, and then they placed benches on the street, and people were starting to sit there, and because we were doing this with all the buildings down the street, all of a sudden the street came back to life. Because when the street was still looking like this, people didn't dare to walk the street anymore because it was empty, it was dark at night, there was rugbying going on as well. So people started avoiding the street, and now, because of these small interventions, we see people walking down the street again.
The weather has also improved.
That helps. But we also try to think through how can we activate public space in the winter, dark times, cold, and etc. So to think about the seasons. This led to the city then saying, okay, the space isn't used here. We started a debate about the amount of parking spaces needed. We started a small town park first, and then that led to a more permanent intervention of creating an entire park here. So this building changed from this into this over the course of 3 years' time. And now the value went up so much that it's seen as a part of the inner city now in terms of the use. And the Havenstede is now right now selling all the buildings because it's becoming interesting for dividends. So maybe we shot ourselves in our own foot. That's another debate again about the relationship between gentrification and placemaking. This place turned into this. So just to bring more life to the streets in this place, we ran into this guy who said, well, I have a cooking studio in the neighborhood to teach the poor kids from the area to eat healthily. And I'd like to start my own restaurant. And by the way, I also collect trains. So this is the sort of stuff that only happens when you make it network, right? I could have never written this down with a pencil in any master plan beforehand. But he really meant trains. We thought he was having a midlife crisis and still playing with the trains of his childhood. But he had a former East German restoration wagon, and he asked, nothing is happening in here, can I put my train down here, start planting my own vegetables, and turn this space into a place. So this is the chef, as you can see, and this is his train. And this space was turned into a place. So this is not only about design, it's very much about the use, but it's also about the way you organize this. Because this you can only achieve if you manage to create a neighborhood community that is then coming up with these crazy ideas that you would never come up with yourself. Or in Utrecht, in the newly built situation, because this is more a transformation area, so Utrecht is more newly built. Here from the very first start, we thought through with the municipality, how can we make the urban design in such a way that we will get human scale at the end. So that starts already with the street width, with the network of streets. It's about how you organize the high-rise in the area, how you create places for the sun, how you deal with the climate, what happens on the ground floor spaces, thinking through a strategy for the ground floors on the area level. And red are the public ground floors and blue are the more residential ground floors. But then even to split up the ownership of urban blocks to create more diversity. Remember the speed of the eye. You don't want such a block to be developed by just one developer with one architect. You want to split it up. So that in this case, it's municipally owned land, so they can tender it, and they can tender it in a different way as well. And then to have this podium tower idea of the high-rise with the setback, so that the wind isn't caught on the top of the building and being brought down to the public space, because that's what happens a lot, and then the public space won't be comfortable for human beings to be in anymore. So, in summary, we say we need to get from a two-dimensional idea of public space to a three-dimensional idea of public space. That makes it not only a government responsibility, but a shared responsibility. So that's why the org part is so important. It's not only about design, it's about the combination of design, use, and management, hardware, software, and org. It's not something you can perceive only with top-down initiatives, but not only with bottom-up initiatives as well. You need to combine those two to create a platform for those partners to be sitting at the same table, which is what we do with place games and high-level games and the neighborhood activities. And we need to develop much more knowledge and bring it to practice and bridge that gap really, which is one of the reasons why we're developing a toolbox for placement. Okay, this is my part, and Siënna will talk briefly on how we'd like to bring these ideas to the Asian.
So, when we started the city at eye level network and group, we noticed there was a lack for practical cases on how to create good cities. Then we created a couple of books like Hans showed, but then we noticed that we just had a couple of Asian cases in our book, and there was really a lack of interesting Asian cases collected in a book accessible for everybody. We discovered a couple of interesting partners who could work together with us in different parts in Asia. We are working together with Pink City from Kuala Lumpur, Urban Discovery in Hong Kong, and some places from Taipei, and UN Habitat for more diverse countries in Asia. Amsterdam in 2017, and we hosted a couple of workshops on how to create good scale city in Asia. We noticed that the Think City was a really interesting partner to work with, and they were really keen on developing this Asian book together with us. But that not only to collect the cases, but they were really interested on how to develop a city methodology for their Asian cases. So they invited us to come to Kuala Lumpur to host a couple of trainings, not only for people in Kuala Lumpur, more protectionists and students, but also for their own staff. So we hosted a couple of trainings, and always when we host trainings, we like to go outside and analyze public space, because then you really experience the space instead of working inside on your desk and not really experience the environment. So here we have a couple of interesting groups working together on analyzing a space. Pastor Seni was the MRT station in the Chinese district in Kuala Lumpur. And this is always a sort of a workshop method we use to really go in depth into the space. And to normally, when you live in a city, you stop noticing a couple of things, but then when you analyze it while doing a place game, you really, sort of stop and look around and sense and experience the place in a different way. So we did that as a sort of a start of exploring what is a good shift in methodology we have, because of course the city at eye level cases we have and all the lessons we learned from these were mostly Western oriented, and we wanted to experience how can we sort of adjust the methodology we have to a more Asian context. So this was sort of a exploring case for us to see what the possibilities were. We asked all the participants to rate the public space we analyzed, and it's a really interesting way to see what public space is working, what is not, and what has potential to be transformed into a more pleasant, lovable space, like you see here. So like Hans showed, I don't know if you remember, there was like one park with more of the gray areas that was here. No, yeah. So there's more here, so it's a really big area. There's new areas here, so it's a really interesting space to analyze, because it was in the historical Chinese district. So there was lots of things going on, but it was really interesting to explore with the local people from Kuala Lumpur and analyze the space. Since they were also working on this while Young Habitats conference in Kuala Lumpur was hosted last year. They also used this space to use it as an experiment to change with parklets, so to exchange a parking space to a permanent space to sit or to use as sort of a hangout chill area. And we noticed that in our books that we collected, we did have really some interesting Asian cases. Together with Young Habitat, we explored a couple of interesting cases already. This is in Seoul, in India, in Japan, and this is in our city eye level kids book that is coming out. This is in Singapore. But we also did research. We had an intern from Thailand during the summer. She really investigated what was interesting as new potential cases. So I'm going to show you a couple to sort of see what we normally look for as cases. So this was in Taipei. It was more on heritage redevelopment, and it's now turned into a creative park. This is a market in Bangkok that is trying to, the owner really wanted to change it and make it more of the local people instead of the markets you see now are more gentrified as sort of disnification you see often in Asia. And this market was together with the local stakeholders transformed into really a place as to show the different heritage in the city. Area renewal in Vietnam. We see a lot of different renewals along rivers in Asia, so that's a really interesting topic. Pedestrian-friendly cities in Hong Kong. This is more a city-wide strategy. That is also different levels, so we don't always look for more bottom-up initiatives, but also city-wide strategies and middle-down strategies. And like I said, we work with different partners because we are really keen on working with local partners, since we also have knowledge, but of course local partners have really the on-ground knowledge, and we just fly in, of course, but then when we leave, we don't want to sort of leave a sort of a blank space. In November, there's going to be a placemaking week in Wuhan in China. So this is sort of a momentum also for us to explore the Chinese field of placemakers and developers. And in October 2019, we're organizing a placemaking week in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur and in Georgetown, together with Green City and Project for Public Spaces. But we want to use the placemaking week as a momentum to launch the book and to collect the network of people who wrote an article or a case, to get everybody together and to network and connect, since we're noticing that a lot of Asian organizations are looking for interesting cases on placemaking and all these topics we showed before, but they always look to Western examples or like the really big projects. And we think there's really a lack in sort of being proud of your own environment and different examples in your own context. So we try to collect sort of a network of placemakers and to improve sort of the knowledge exchange there is really in Asia. We develop a couple of themes. And I think for now it's really interesting to have sort of a discussion on what we could sort of offer to the Asian network in creating this book. So we developed a couple of themes, like a good balance between geographical spread, formal, informal, day and night, since of course day functions are really different from night functions. In Asia, we see a lot of night markets. It's different use, of course, of public space than during the day. Of course, in Asia, there's a difference between religion. So how can you create public space for all and don't exclude a lot of people, although you still need a couple of closed space? How can you create more space for kids as well? Like we said, the balance between public and private, and the balance between old and new. Like we said, we have the more newly built areas, but also the more transformed areas. And I think it would be interesting to explore the different themes and cases we need for this book and for the network, and to see what is really the need for this book for Asian placemakers. So I think that's sort of the start of the discussion for now. But maybe we start.
Next slide.
Oh, yeah.
This is also the question.
And of course, why we're here. Of course, that's a good one. Since we're also looking into more partners to have more knowledge exchange and use the different networks we have within, of course, here in the Netherlands, but also in Asia, to be a sort of a stronger network and to see how we can further develop the list of cases we have. So that's why we thought it was really interesting to talk with Siënna, and of course why we're here to see what the possibilities are for collaboration. That's the last one. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Next question, do you want to do it one by one? Let's see how it goes.
you talk about how when you talk about changes in seasons, so the city may adapt to the season. But what about natural disasters, which are, seems with climate change, to be more violent? If all these things are on the street, then a lot gets lost by just the way from the sea.
Okay, maybe we should repeat the question for the online viewers.
Yeah.
So for them to hear the question. So your question, if I understand correctly, is that okay? The public space use may change with the seasons, but what about natural disasters and the impact that they would have on public space and the cities at large? Which I guess is a very good question. I think we want to. We noticed that a lot is being written about that already. So I guess in this book, we want to address the elements that really are close to the human scale quality of cities. So wherever there's an overlap between the measures that need to be taken for a city to be more climate approved and the human scale in public space, then those would provide great new cases. So for instance, what we see nowadays is that heavy rainfalls is something more debated in terms of the quality of public space. And measures are taken to soften the surface of the public space for it to be more of a sponge, to be able to sponge the rainwater more. Which if you do that in the right way, can contribute a lot to the human scale quality of the public space as well. So I think you're of course completely right. So on the one hand, we kind of want to not write a book about urban development at large. So we want to look for where's the overlap between those new influences that we have in our cities and the idea of human scale. So maybe it's also a question back to you guys, where what should we then focus on when it comes to the aging of the city?
So my first question is about the city at high level Asia. Are you basically taking mostly Southeast Asia because most of your examples are based out of Southeast Asia?
Oh yeah. I talked about geographical spreading.
Maybe
Yeah.
the question.
Yeah. We, as you asked, if it's mostly Southeast Asia that we focus on for the cases. We try to have a good spread as possible, so we try to have all Asian countries in the book, and then to have sort of a more broader experience in different ways of projects and cases and approaches, instead of only focusing on Southeast Asia or Greater China or. So what I showed now is as you mentioned, mostly Southeast Asia. But we want to have is a good spread as possible.
The reason I'm asking is because the idea of the public space in South Asia, and especially India, is very different from what you're looking at. Because firstly, the public space becomes a very gendered space, and as you said, there are many facades, there's more people. Generally, for a woman, that's more scary. Like more people means more chances of you getting molested or catcalling. Whereas the high-rise areas are considered more safe for women. So therefore, the idea of the public space again talking from experience in India, is very different as well as very problematic, especially the area, the open area part, than it is in, I think, Southeast Asia. Because in Southeast Asia, as I saw from your presentation, it's they are more open to being out in that public space. In India, actually, generally, public space is considered something which is avoidable, maybe, unless it's within a very sort of bordered area where you can break down the people into the kind of class, caste, so on. So have you looked at that? Is what my question is.
No, not yet.
By far not.
No.
So that's why we need you guys help.
What we did find a case, I think, again, park for only women, where they could, I think, just where the kids could play, where they don't need to wear a scarf, and where it's really, because we talk about places for all, but of course, not in every context you want to have all people together in one space. But I think it's a really interesting comment in that in not every country there's a need for this. So I think that would be really interesting. Maybe we need to, per country or something, we need to have a list of criteria of what to look for. I think this is a really good comment on if we look for in cases that we need to look for good examples on how to find a balance between public space and.
It's interesting what you're saying, because it goes against what Jane Jacobs says in her famous book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities. She's also against the super blocks, and she says that the more eyes are on the street, the safer the space, including for women. But maybe that's a very North American vantage point. And these high-rise areas, there's fewer eyes on the street, so that theoretically, according to her writings, that would be less safe.
I don't know. Is it high-rise that you think is safer? Because I don't see in India.
It's not about the high-rise. I think it's more about the safety around those high-rises, because the police are better equipped there.
So there's other factors that
Exactly.
The communities.
The safe communities. So, you want to go out for a walk at night, you feel safer there than you would feel.
Then, of course, there's this discussion in if it's public space, communities, or if it's private space, and then there's
Against the
different-
rules,
yeah.
That's the interesting part. In India, a lot of these high rises, which are gated communities, create public spaces within that, and that's considered more safe for the children to play around. To to have you would have a gym, you would have a cafe, you had everything in there, so you don't have to ever get up, which is problematic.
Yeah, I think that's happening.
So I think there's some more people.
That's typical comment on this.
Let's collect some Artie first, and then Willem, and then you, and then let's collect 3 more questions, and then I think that will.
I'd like to just add, for Asia, what might be interesting to look at is also rooftops. Because, in the tropics we know cities where, for example, in North India, in some of the Mughal cities, the kite flying, and it still happens there. So there's a lot of shared kite flying, and many other things happen on the rooftop. So that's another thing to look at. Not just
Yeah.
So you got sky now.
sky, I don't know the sky, but it's not the street. But rooftop is important. And then, while there are spaces of, streets are also spaces of gendered public spaces, but there are also spaces where women, and I like your idea of mental ownership, although I don't agree with the way you use that term, the phrase mental ownership. Why doesn't it have something to do with shared or common? Why are you using ownership? But I like the concept, I like what you're saying, because there is a real, it's more like an appropriation. But for example, in the south of India, they use rice powder to clean the place, and to use drawings, which are ephemeral drawings on the floor of the street. It's swept, and then you have these drawings, and it's everywhere. It's a kind of appropriation, and also a women's space entirely. And early in the morning, the first thing that you wake up, and the street wakes up with these beautiful floor diagrams. So that's another thing to consider, because there are spaces which are related to your idea of mental ownership.
I feel you should be one of the co-authors.
And the third idea.
Actually, also.
And the third idea is the idea of appropriation through street shrines. So you put a photograph of a god or a goddess at any corner. The idea is that it makes it safer. And this happens everywhere in all parts of Asia, and I'm not sure about Africa, but a shrine in a corner is a kind of safeguarding from evil spirits. And then very soon, and before your very eyes, it becomes a little temple or a shrine where people start coming to it. And that also is not gendered then. It's a safe space, and people can. So I just wanted to bring in these 3 points.
Okay, Willem, Margriet, and Philippe.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed your talk.
I just couldn't help. You started with talking about the rational and the irrational experience of people towards the town. Your talk came across as very rational, by the way. But anyhow, what made me think is, I think was said before, you made some observations. You used words like boring and whatever. And I think, well, how universal is that? And I'm old enough to remember how the Belvedere was built, architects, etc. It was in the 60s. Paradise was coming to Holland, wasn't it? And not only by the architects who, of course, were building it, but also the first people who moved in. But now most of these blocks have been pulled down. So something has changed. And when I talk about universality of observations you made, I think it's perhaps not only geographical, cultural, but perhaps also generational. And when you talk about that what you want to do is with sustainability for 50 years, 100 years, I wonder, you know, these beautiful streets, I love it with trees, etc. How will it be in 20, 30 years? Will people then look for other things? And does it have something to do, perhaps, that towns are not only built by architects, people they love to, also by people themselves who live there. And they also create their environments. And sometimes it goes hopelessly wrong, although the architects had the right idea. And how do you deal with that? And I think it's not enough to plant a tree. I'm exaggerating now. You know, that there's more to it. I hear you also have psychologists in your group, so there is something, how do you deal with people? They have different backgrounds, different education, etc. And that may change also, perhaps for architects, how you build a town, how you adapt to that. Just an observation.
It would be very tempting to answer immediately. But
Shall I collect a few more and then
that's fine.
Actually, thank you for a very interesting talk. I had a couple of points that I wanted to piggyback on in terms of what Willem and Hartley and so to add to the excellent point about rooftops, etc., there's also the idea of the balcony, of course, and that's in Asia as well as in many European cities as well. So again, you have a big level between the street and the rooftop, basically, and what appears, and it's part of your sort of public-private facade. And going sort of related to one of the points that Willem was making, how universal are these understandings. So I was a bit struck by, perhaps it's in your book already, which I hope to read, but this idea of the human skill. I mean, how would you define what's human? Because we get into this whole universal versus particular debate, and are we actually then using notions of human and humanity as in human rights law and things like that emanate from European Enlightenment, or what sort of understandings of human are we using in terms? And of course, if you look at acronym theory and things like that, I mean, you have shades of human and non-human, so nothing really is entirely human. You only have mixtures all the time, if you look at the latter. So, but the other point that I would really like to push you a little bit in terms of trying to understand what we understand as public and private. Is the divide so neat? I mean, you talked about ownership, but for instance, to take again an example out of the Indian context, understandings of public and private was sort of supplanted onto indigenous understandings of what's owned and not owned, what is inside the house versus the world. So, you know, in terms of indigenous Bengali terms, for instance, so what is your own is actually quite different from what could be understood as public and private, and goes with all sorts of historical, actually, understandings of it. So I think it's a lot more messy in terms you could have the inside of the outside and the outside of the inside. The house is an extension, the street extending into the house and the house. So I think understanding the public and private, I think, but perhaps your book already looks into it, or maybe the next one would, in terms of making these understandings of public-private a little bit more fluid, contextually specific, culturally specific as well. And I think that might add greatly to designing more specific and effective toolboxes, perhaps, which are geared to, particular situations. And the last point that I might actually make is that I was struck by the use of the term cases. So are the Asian cities only going to be cases? I mean, is your theoretical toolbox, etc., already complete, or do you expect, I mean, I'm speaking from the point of view of an anthropologist and ethnographer, we don't really just use, you know, data from certain parts of the world as an example or a case to illustrate a point, but we hope that the ethnographies or the cases would then sort of challenge and feed into and expand the theoretical framework and toolbox. So maybe it's a terminological nicety, but I thought I needed to sort of just put it out there.
Is that enough for now, or do you should collect more?
Maybe.
Let's start.
Hopefully there's room for more.
Okay, you start responding.
Oh, no, that's very good.
Well, I will continue with what Manfred was saying about cases and complex because you mentioned often the city must be sustainable for the next 50 to 300 years, etc. So there's this. I feel there's a sense of presentism. You talk about the present and the future, but the reality, as Manfred mentioned, is often much more messy, and the historic dimension is often there's a historical tendency, I think, in a lot of the discourse on urban development, which to me is very scary, because it is really to no city, no case is an open slate, and they are also the result of a lot of history of contested histories, contested stories within urban space itself. And to me, for instance, you showed a picture of Saigon, Ho Chi Minh City, of the Canal Pygmy. It looks nice, but this place used to have Chinese shophouses that were all razed to the ground. And so if you just think that by putting some grass and things that you are somehow, making the city livable, I think the problem has much deeper roots. And in the case of Asia, and that's where, as an historian, I think also there are questions of events that are sometimes that have been very, very powerful. And the last 200 years, you have the phenomenon of colonialism, then anti-colonialism, revolutions, etc., that have been very brutal historically, very violent. So most of the cities in Asia have been violented. People have been evicted. A city like Delhi has 80% of its people are not from Delhi originally. So you see that also in Africa. The cities that you see are not really used or inhabited by the people who initially built these buildings, for instance. So their relation to the space is very problematic. They don't necessarily identify with the place. And then we can go on this kind of discussion that gated new communities and open slate, it's easier somehow. So how can you really historicize and somehow contextualize and also I agree with what you say, Manfred, eventually draw something that goes beyond the case, each case. In my view, there are some general trends in the Asian context. Massive eviction movement of people in the last 200 years, a massive transformation from colonial, post-colonial, and now new investors. The factor of Chinese investment, I mean, to me, these are fundamental things that are completely changing and brutalizing the urban landscape in the scale that even in the West we never seen. So how to incorporate really the fact that every intervention that you do has to be rooted in a historical long-term process, not just looking forward but also backward. Sorry, it's a long.
It's a long process. Should we just begin come back and forth? I would actually like this not to be a discussion between you guys and us, because I think it should be a discussion between us. We should be really humble, given the experience that you guys have in the Asian context. So I'd rather actually make it into a discussion between you. A few notions maybe. enlightenment? How much are we influenced by that? Well, of course, that's our background, and probably we cannot escape seeing the world without having that heritage in ourselves. The research we're trying to do is really based not on what people should be doing on public space. So we've never really rooted into the research before us. There's lots of theories on how people should behave or what people should be doing. The research we're trying to use is really observation. So people really vote with their feet when it comes to use of public space. They will find their way to the public space, those public spaces that suit them best. So we feel there's something to be learned from those spaces that people are actually using, and then to understand what are the mechanisms behind those places. And then when you do that type of research, that's the type of research that, for instance, William White is really observing which are the spaces that people are using, which are the spaces that people tend to avoid, and what are the characteristics of those spaces. Now, he was doing that in Manhattan in the 80s context, in an environment when it was still very much only the central business district. So we should actually be repeating that sort of research in many, many different contexts, I believe, to get a better, more universal understanding. And then, well, we do find that some elements are more universal if you dig deeper. The way we listen to our environment, the way our eyes work, the way we are constantly scanning the expressions on other people's faces in public spaces. Whether you're from India or from the Netherlands or from the US, this is something you'll be doing instinctively while walking down the street. Whereas other elements are far more contextual. Religious factors, the hierarchy in society, the division in society, the climate. So I believe that given the fact that we want to really write an Asian version, we should try to be able to pull out those themes out of the cases, out of these discussions, and really base it on the local, or if you could say local in Asian, it's also a question, but more on the Asian themes. So we would be actively looking for those, and I think we don't write a good book if we only get to those, make it into a collection of nice cases, indeed. So we should not only be working on those cases, we should also be working on the themes, and that should be an interaction between those two. So I guess you've mentioned some really good themes that we weren't aware of yet, and some we are aware of. The function of religion in public space in Asia is totally different than in the US or in North America or in Europe. There are these differences. So help me out, Siënna. Maybe some guys want to react to each other.
The lady here and then Elena, and then the gentleman in the back. Please go ahead.
So my question is again regarding what you were talking about the public spaces. So I live in India here on vacation, and the reason I say this is because I think the big problem in South Asia, even in Southeast Asia right now, is that you actually don't want to spend a lot of time outdoors because of the air pollution. Now, what a lot of city planners are trying to do, they're trying to have these vertical forests, either pillars, or they're trying to actually have these cafes that you showed, on the streets next to the parks, because the air quality is, during summers it's too hot to sit outdoors, and during winters there's so much smog there that you do not really want to socialize with others sitting outdoors. So I was wondering if your book looks into that, whether these vertical forests, whether they work at all, or it's just something that you look at a vertical forest, okay, this is a safe area, like in terms of air quality, so I would like to sit there. So whether your book addresses that, because all across Asia, this, I think, air pollution is one of the biggest problems we are facing right now.
Yeah, we didn't have cases especially about air pollution, but also
Not yet.
No, not yet. But the thing also similar to what you said, since people don't want to be outside, since the climate and the air pollution, they tend to be in public space in supermalls, for example. This is also, I think, an interesting case. But
so we should be open to redefining our ideas about public space.
But we did our list of cases or articles is not final, so we're really in this what we need to have in the book. So all these topics are really, really interesting for us.
What we see happening internationally right now is that health is becoming a big discussion and a major motor for cities to start investing differently into the cities, into the modes of transport, into the and eventually also the quality of public space. Whether it's a public space that challenges people to move and to walk and to cycle, or whether it's a public space that only allows people to be in an enclosed schedule of the car. So it would be interesting to see if we could find good cases about that in Asia. Or what are the cities that are already trying to make a change there? Do they exist?
Because a lot of cities in Asia are now trying to have, say, sidewalks with a lot of trees, and then, like I said, vertical forests in some buildings. Because even, I don't know whether they are effective, but at least it makes you feel that, okay, this place, because it has a lot of greenery, it's probably better to sit outdoors. So as a consumer, that definitely affects my choice if I want to sit outdoors, if there's greenery around. And it could be something minimal, but it still makes a huge difference if you want to, most cafeterias, like cafes, will now have an indoor seating area and an outdoor seating area. And they're putting these, plants like this and everything, just to probably make it appear that the air quality there is probably better.
So this typically is an example of a more short-term oriented solution, I would say.
Yes.
Which is interesting. We want to gather those. But we'd also be interested in what are the more long-term strategies that cities are setting up to change this over time. And then it takes you 10, 20, 30, 40 years to make a change. We always get the people here coming to the Netherlands wanting to learn how to become a bicycle city, and then they want to do it from one day to another, right? Whenever we show a group around, we always say to them, look, we didn't start yesterday, we started 40 years ago. So we would also be interested in long-term citywide strategies to make those changes. So if you have any cases, please tell us.
Okay, we have a few more hands, and we've already passed two, so let's just collect the questions. Elena, and then the gentleman in the back, and then Paul.
Yeah, I actually wanted to ask a question about if longevity of the project is one of the criteria for the cases. Because, for example, you mentioned about this case in Rotterdam where a train enthusiast wanted, can I place the train here and make something? Whereas in Kuala Lumpur, you said that there's a vacant space and that there are tensions between like private property and public rights and all. So maybe something about also as a criteria, maybe what kind of public-private arrangements, what kind of arrangements that they actually agree on. For example, maybe it's a concession that they're renting it for a certain period and maybe they would own it after 10 or 20 years. So one of these things. And then the second question is, because you mentioned that you are also going to have a placemaking week in Wuhan, and I'm also involved in a project for sustainable urban renewal, and we are going to compare different cases between China and Netherlands on sustainable urban renewal. And I was wondering if somebody is interested to contribute, what are the next steps? So, yeah.
Yeah. Let's just, I just would like time to select the questions and you can respond.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I come again with the South Asia example. So I think with the South Asia we see the broader problem, because from my experience, it can really have a very different urban and social history than Southeast Asia in many ways. And one of the dimensions is the noise level, for example. Even a small Indian town, you can have a sidewalk, you can have trees, but I mean, sometimes it's impossible even to scream. So not only the eyes, the noise, for example, in a country like India is particularly intense as we talk about what we could consider a public space. And also, it has been also told the notion of public can really be very different. And for example, in the city I've been living in India, there was a huge renewal of the river margins in Ahmedabad. But in the end, if it's not historically grounded, it's a way of serving contemporary political projects of erasing the history of the city, erasing the stories of the people who were using that space. And now, for other, the public space is being used by whom and with intention. So I think it was also been said about the contextualization.
Probably you can see, when you have a case study, for example, see what are the debates around the case study, who are the people who are disliking, what are the negative impacts, because it's a very difficult, I agree, and probably in Europe it's easier to deal with the notion of public than in a country like India. And that's also coming back also to gender spaces is the notion that, for example, as my experience in India, it may be very difficult in many areas to find a sense of neighborhoods because you really belong to different communities that can be in the opposite side of the street but really don't want to mingle. I'm talking about extreme cases. So maybe these gradations between public, private, different notions of who owns the space, because there's a lot of fights, who owns the public space. And that sometimes...
I completely agree.
It's it's a difficult...
I think what we hear from is also to find people who we bring and then be able to write about this in a good way. So please help us out. Please help us out to bring those themes to the book, because we need your guys' experience and help to do this. So, because these are not issues we are addressing as yet in the list of cases that we have. Right?
Yeah, I mean, it depends also on the disciplines we can go in.
This is actually what we hope for from you.
Yeah.
So,
The historians, anthropologists.
Oh,
yes, but not it's a very short question. In view of all these problems and invasions of public space by prying men or women, do you think of, let's say, a migration into virtual space so people can find where they will find themselves to be safe because they can opt out immediately? Certainly is the case. Virtual neighborhood, exactly.
I really like the more realistic literature about what is public space and not the too narrow definitions. Maybe in a certain context also consider the shopping mall as a potentially successful public space. And why not the virtual world? If you look at what our children are doing when they come out of school, and that's the universal thing, I believe, this is restricted to kids here, is that they step into the virtual world and they use it as a kind of an extension of the physical context that they might have, the physical meetings. So that would be very interesting to explore.
Yeah, we do have a case in the kids book on Minecraft. With you and note that they have a program of kids creating their own city while doing Minecraft, and this is sort of a virtual tool for people to not be in the city but create their own city while being on a virtual platform. So I think it's really interesting also to explore those different ways of exploring.
But in general, I would say we would like to embrace a wider definition of what public space could be. And it would be really helpful to have more knowledge on board, more words, to have this more hybrid cultural experience of what is private, what is public. So one of the cases in the current book is about Japanese way of building, and there we have these really hybrid spaces from the inner core of the house to the outside of the street and all the variations in between. So I think that's the only article we really have about this right now. So it would be really interesting to expand on that. But the longevity, we also mean the sustainability of initiatives. So rather than being kicked out, how do initiatives also get to stay? So this is a big debate. We find that this is one of the reasons why we need those networks to grow more and to help each other out more, because the people taking the initiatives, they also need to learn more about this. How does finance work? How does an organization work? How do you claim your position in the city to be more sustainable rather than to be something that is nice in the beginning, create a lot of value and then to be kicked out eventually. So this is a big ongoing debate in the international placemaking community, and this should certainly be a part of the book.
Okay.
I would like to thank you very much for coming here and sharing with us your book, your ideas, your thoughts, and your projects. And I wish you good luck in moving forward, and we'll be very happy to provide ideas and continue the conversation. And let's indeed collaborate.
So the safest is to send a mail, not to me, but to share. So use this email address, which you can share with you guys as well.
Yeah.
Over your email system. And we can also share the presentation if you like, and the links for you to have another look at it. And hopefully we'll be in touch with you guys and also through you.
And if we think about beyond cases, then maybe we can collaborate also.
Yeah, that's what I started
Beyond
to
just
doing
case format.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is where our partnership, really, our partnership really
And thank you to the audience for coming and sharing with us your insights.
Yeah.
Thank you.